My name is Sal Abbinanti. I'm an independent comic book artist, publisher of a couple of books, but Atomika is really what we're talking about.
First off, I mean, just a stunning looking comic. Process wise, how are you able to pour so much detail into page after page? What is an illustrative process that is this level of detail like?
Well, Atomika, I mean, I always tell anybody who wants to get into anything indie, whether you're a writer or an artist or whatever, you really should have some kind of a emotional leverage towards the project or towards the subject matter. I was trying to get into when I decided to do Atomika, I was trying to get into mainstream comics and I could not get arrested. They just did not want my stuff. So I kind of just poured that angst and that kind of frustration or that wanting to do my own thing or wanting to do comics into Atomika. I was lucky enough or fortunate enough to, at the time, indie publishing was really getting affordable. Before, if you wanted to do a comic, you could do black and white. It would cost you, you had to start at $50,000 because you couldn't go to a printer and say, hey, give me 20 copies, give me 500 copies. You had to do print runs of 100,000 or forget it. So, but to answer your question, it was really just, I was pissed off. I was really angry with the comic industry as a whole. I did every portfolio line. I went and saw every editor and they just kept telling me the same thing. We like you. We really, really like it. We can't use it, and that's kind of like, kissing the girl goodnight for a year. And then after a while, you're like, this ain't going anywhere. They're being nice to me, but I wanted to draw Luke Cage. I wanted to draw Captain America and New Gods, and they just weren't having it. So that's kind of where Atomika came from.
When you have a particularly unique style that goes throughout this entire book. I mean, it's particularly grim. It's particularly detailed.
Disturbing. One editor said my art is very disturbing.
and
that's good. Or it's, it's not boring,
I think it's extraordinarily befitting of the story that Atomika tells. But to get into that part of it in a second, but even before that, like where did this style of drawing come from? How is this where you found yourself?
When you become an artist, it's kind of like it starts out as a hobby and then it becomes you just need a place to channel your creativity. So I always in my mind, I mean, people are like, oh, who's your influence? And they name artists I never heard of. And I'm like, guys, I was a Jack Kirby, John Buscema guy. I read John Romita, Death of Gwen Stacy. I was not reading any, abstract expressionist or impressionist stuff. I was mainstream comic. I was a Marvel guy. And, but I grew up with Kirby, and Kirby was a tremendous influence in the sense of, I didn't copy these guys. I just felt that what I learned most from Kirby was comics should be a product of your imagination. They should be just, exaggerate and draw it the way you feel and the way you see it. Now, when you want to do that, that's great until you go to Marvel and say, hey, I want to draw, your book. And they're like, well, you see what our books look like, right? Well, they don't look like this. So at some point, my style's a blessing and a curse. I'm excited that, I don't look like everybody else, but that being said, you better just put it out yourself, which is what I ultimately had to do.
In a lot of ways, it's Marvel's loss.
Well, no, it's okay. I mean, I heard a lot. I mean, my God, every line I stood in, I remembered every horrible critique I got. And they all start out with, what kind of drugs did you do in high school? And they all, and oh my God, this work is this and this work is that. And it's like, guys, I don't know any other way to do it. I've tried to tame it down and it just you wind up going right back to where you were. And so Atomika was just kind of growing up in the 70s, Russia was always the evil empire. So I kind of and I was a lover of Thor. John Buscema's Thor had a big influence on me as a kid. And then New Gods changed my life when I first saw Jack Kirby's New Gods. So I just channeled that whole Russia was the evil empire into my own book. And after a lot of portfolio line failures, some friends of mine in the comic industry said, Sal, they're never going to hire you. Forget about it. And so I either decided I was going to become a plumber or join the fire department. I was going to join the fire department, or I was going to print my own stuff. So that's where putting Atomika out by myself came from.
Yeah, you sort of half answered my next question, which is yeah, the Russia is this evil empire. It's several decades of an alternate history of Russia from the 20s to the later part of the century.
Right.
In what ways the art meant to reflect a reality versus in what ways it meant to reflect a boogeyman?
It was, well, part of it was, I mean, I wasn't, the title is God is Red, which is, it's not religious, it's not political, which is, kills me, because the first thing people think when they see the title and they see Russia is they think that what are you, a communist? And I'm like, guys, come on. It's a comic. But I also felt that there's kind of a statement there in the sense of technology. I grew up in a big Italian Catholic family and everybody went to church, but nobody goes to church anymore. Technology has kind of become our God, has become our religion. And so that's kind of where the idea of where Atomika came from, being where, religion is. And then when I started to do some research on the Soviet Union, that's what they told the people. They said, look, the state is your religion. All religion was outlawed by the Soviet Union because they thought it was counterproductive to the state. So I thought, oh, they just created their own God, which is technology, technology is going to solve all our problems, which we know it doesn't. But that's what we were told in the 50s, that there'll be no more poverty. There'll be no more, disease. There'll be no more. And it turned out, no, it's all bullshit. But I kind of melded that with New Gods, and then threw Thor in.
Yeah. Well, and so the comic very clearly, I forget exactly the line in it, but there's a line at some point that specifically it says you have to, in order to have this new God, you must build this mythology around it.
Right.
And there's also the beginning of the story revolves around the death of all of the old gods and the ways that Atomika and representing technology and movement into the future has to, I mean, in the comic, literally kill all of the old gods. I'm curious, where did those old gods, did they, their names and the ways that they were developed as concepts, did they come from directly like indigenous traditions in Russia, or were they adaptations from things and it was more of an original ideas?
No, I would like to, well, a couple of them were, like Chernobyl was one, his son is Chernobyl, but it's kind of like what Kirby did with, or what Marvel did with Thor and did with Asgard and all those guys. Those, I didn't realize that as a kid, but then as you get older, you realize those are all based on Greek mythology. So when I started to do more and more research on the Soviet Union or Russia, I started with Russia before the Soviet Union, tremendous amount of mythology. They have all these mythological gods because it's such a huge country that I thought, okay, here I go. I got my my counterparts, in the sense of Atomika is the new God. He's the 20th century, the God of the 20th century, which is technology. Now all these mythological gods who had been worshipped are dying because a god dies if it's not worshipped. So he now is jealous, the way you would be if you want to be worshipped. So he wants to eliminate all these mythological gods of Russia. And Baba Yaga and all of that, Marasko, Pravada, they're all based on Russian mythology. You just kind of put them your own way. And then Alex Ross, who's a dear friend of mine, he's like, hey, what about a Russian Justice League? And I'm like, well, I don't want, so that's where the state came from. In the book, there's this group called the State, and it was just kind of my riff on if I had a Russian JLA. So it kind of went in that direction a little bit, but I would say 99% of the characters are based on Russian mythology.
As for their designs, were they derived from particular Interpretations or
Yeah,
what?
I got in a little bit of problem with Atomica because there's the comparison to Dr. Manhattan. Everybody's like, hey, he looks like Dr. Manhattan. I'm like, well, he's really not. I mean, everybody in comics loves Watchmen, obviously, and I'm a huge Alan Moore fan and Dave Gibbons fan. But as I started to design or lay out what I wanted Atomica to look like, I kept coming up with all these different costumes and outfits, and none of it. It just all looked like an American superhero. No matter what I did, it looked like an American superhero. So I remembered back to Michelangelo and how the way they portrayed gods. Gods are very vain. So the reason that all those, a lot of the Renaissance paintings, and especially the ones in the Vatican and the Last Judgment, and are naked, is because they're very vain. So I said, well, I'll just make them naked, but I'll wrap them in a Soviet flag, kind of like The Kids Are All Right from the Who. I remember that album cover where they're sitting there and they're just wrapped in the Union Jack. So I said, well, I'm going to just simplify it. I'm going to break them down to not giving them a costume because it'll look like an American drawing a Russian character. So I said, all right, I'll just make him naked, wrapped in the Soviet flag. He's a god, so he doesn't need clothes because he's very vain. And then I put the red star on his head. But yeah, there's been people that are like, hey, he's Dr. No, sure. But there's always going to be a comparison to anybody naked who's Dr. Manhattan. But I couldn't make him naked because if you make a naked character, they won't let you put him in the catalog, in the previews catalog, when you want to sell your book. They'll put it in the adult section, which means nobody will ever see it. So I put him in the Soviet flag.
I always like to finish up asking, just what do you hope that people will get out of reading Atomica?
Well, I mean, Atomica, what I like about doing this is kind of what I've wanted to do for a lot of years. And COVID created a perfect situation for me because I just did a Kickstarter campaign with my last graphic novel. And this Atomica was a labor of love 10 years ago. And I got a lot of great artists. In those days, I was doing a lot of cons. I was doing a couple of cons a month in those days. So I was able to get a lot of creators to contribute to Atomica. So, but because it was an indie book, it didn't get a tremendous amount of exposure because, a lot of comic stores just unfortunately won't touch indie titles. They have their set. And in comics, this. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of brand loyalty in comics. You've got your Wolverine, you've got your Batman, you've got, when you go to a comic store, you already know what you're going to buy. It's like cigarettes. You got your brand. So getting people to buy indie titles is tough. With this, I'm putting this omnibus together where it's all 12 issues, but I've also got a tremendous amount of pinups and covers and back covers and art that I got. Some really great guys to do stuff for that nobody's seen, because it just didn't get a lot of exposure. Alex Ross and Bill Sienkiewicz and Darwin Cook and Claudio Castellini and Simon Bisley and a lot of guys that were really cool enough to help me. It didn't get a lot of exposure. With this omnibus edition, everything's in it. It's all 12 issues and it's all the extra bonus stuff and the Love and Kisses edition. So I'm pretty excited that I can put this to bed and say, okay, guys, here's all the stuff that I got for this book.
Yeah, it's
not for everybody, but it's
definitely a difficult industry to get things to break past the wall of these are the three things everyone knows. And then there's also everything else that's also awesome.
It's tough. But look, at the end of the day, when you put an indie title out, that going in, that it's going to be a push. So, but that's kind of why you do it. You do it. It's like, you do it because you have to do it.
Well, I certainly think it's quite a
unique
and pretty cool comic. We will certainly look forward to sharing this interview and promoting it when the Kickstarter officially launches. And thanks so much for your time.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Is there any internet presence or places that you would like to promote?
Yeah, Mercury Comics or, Sal Abbinanti. I'm all over the place. I'm on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and, it's not a big secret anymore, but With that, there gets to be a lot of noise. After a while, you don't even see or hear the stuff anymore on the internet because there's so much of it. But you still got to do it. You still have to get it out there.
Well, again, much appreciated. Many
Thank you.
thanks. And have a good rest of the day.